Hey everyone, it's Melissa with Word. If you're new here, I'm a homeschooling mom of 3 kiddos. I have a 7-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and we are in our 4th year of homeschooling. So this is a video in collaboration with Shauna from Making Everyday Magic. I've been watching Shauna literally from the beginning of my homeschooling curriculum, like ever. So when I first started looking into curriculums, I happened to come across Shauna's channel. She's another secular homeschooling mom, and I've been watching her channel ever since. And this collaboration is our early years in homeschooling. So it's going to be kind of chatty. I will leave the playlist below. I will also leave a link to Shauna's channel below for you. And I will just chat through how our early years of homeschooling went and what it looked like. So when we started homeschooling, I was a in-home daycare. It was governed by the state. It was like a true actual in-home daycare, not just a running without certifications or rules. Like I was a licensed in-home daycare facility, and my daughter was in 4K, and she had already done a 1.5 years of early childhood prior to that at our public school. So she was still in 4K, and COVID had started in March, and my daycare being in-home was allowed to stay open per the state because I was an in-home facility, not a center. So at first we stayed open because everything was just kind of crazy and we didn't know what was going on. My daughter was sent home. Again, I said she was in 4K then. The teachers had no idea. Like, it wasn't their fault. Her teachers were amazing. She had the best early childhood teacher I could have ever asked for. Her 4K teacher was a great as well, and her early childhood teacher often worked in the 4K room, so it was perfect. We loved that. We only had a few incidents with school that didn't have anything to do with the teachers that upset me in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't the teacher's fault whatsoever. It was not even the school district's fault. It was the bus driving districts or the bus driving company's issue, and that's a story for another day. But our original homeschooling, since I already had a daycare, I was already using curriculum in my daycare on the day-to-day for tot school, preschool, early childhood. All those things were already part of my daycare and part of our everyday. We had lesson plans, we had activities, we had field trips, we had all the things already, I was kind of already doing, but with just a larger scale because I had anywhere from 4 to 6 kids here. I think legally, it's been years now, but I think legally I was allowed to have 4, plus I had my own kids that didn't count against my count of 4, which left me with 6 kids at most days. But regardless, it wasn't that difficult for me to add in Callie's curriculum for 4K when she came home during the 2020 virus situation. Her teachers sent home like a huge packet of stuff, like basically just crafts and arts projects to do. And they would send videos occasionally through the app they used to send us photos of them at school. They would send videos through that to try to help with the learning process. But the reality is when they first sent the kids home, they weren't expecting it to be that long. They sent home like a packet for like 2 weeks. And then they dropped off a packet at our door of more art projects about a month later, and then more projects again. And I personally felt like she went from learning all her letters and letter sounds to creating skeleton art projects, which isn't a bad thing. And that art stuff is something she needs to do. I just felt like she needed to be learning more of her ABCs and her letter sounds, and I was afraid she was going to fall behind. But the reality is behind who? Every other kid was in the same boat her age. Every other kid in the school was in the same boat. I mean, a lot of the parents didn't have the ability to even be doing that packet with their kids. So she was doing the packet. We were taking the pictures and sending them back to her teacher that they were completed. But then on the side, I started adding in some of the lessons from of course she was getting the lessons from my daycare as well. So any unit studies we were doing for the month, we always did weather units and dinos units and shark units, solar system units. So she was getting all of that, but it was at a lower grade level than she was in. So it was aged more for, you know, that little kid to 3-year-old age. And she was incorporating that, and she was learning about her planets and sharks and all the things. I'm not really sure where I was in explaining everything because my husband called and I forgot what I was saying, to be honest. I know I was somewhere in the explanation, but he called because my daughter was just finishing ballet and they were heading home soon. He wanted to let me know they were headed home. My point is that homeschooling my daughter wasn't too much of a shock to me. And when I started getting worried about what she was learning and what she wasn't learning, I started looking online for curriculum ideas. My researching ended up keep bringing me back to YouTube reviews. And the more of those I watched, the more I was really intrigued by homeschooling and how that was going. And oddly enough, before I even started researching, I would send the finished homework assignments to my child's teachers. And her early childhood teacher that still worked in the 4K room, she would occasionally message me on Facebook and say things like, you better not homeschool her when all this is over. We're gonna miss her too much if you do that. And I would message back and be like, why would I do that? I would never. She's definitely going back to you. I promise. I was like, I have my hands full with the daycare. I cannot do this as well. And I honestly had never even thought of homeschooling up until she started saying, and it wasn't like it was a one-off thing. She kind of said it here and kind of said it there. And then my mom had kind of said something along the lines of, well, why don't you just homeschool her then? You're already doing it. And I was like, no, what I'm doing is not homeschooling. We're just doing the paperwork the school sends home. And it started really setting in. I started really thinking about it a lot. So I started kind of researching it a little here and there. And I was like, well, how would I even do that? I didn't realize then that there were box curriculums that could just be sent to me and told me what to do. I didn't realize there was a math curriculum that was already done. Like, I didn't know there was such a thing. I thought like I had to teach her math, not I had to teach her math from a workbook. And once I started looking through it a little bit, I was like, wait, this is essentially what I do in the daycare. I buy a curriculum, I lesson plan, and they learn. It really wasn't that far of a stretch for me. And I kind of brought it up to my husband, and at first he was like, no, let's not do that. And then all the rules for kindergarten came back, and I didn't disagree with the rules. I had a daycare. I was probably overly worried about becoming infected or how many people we were in contact with. I had a lot of parents that were way less worried and way more worried than me, and it was a very difficult balancing act, and being like, yeah, my 6-year-old's gonna go to school and definitely keep her mask on all day and not bring home this virus to my daycare and all those kids. Or on the flip side, my daycare kids were going to bring it to us and then us give it to our kid who then takes it to the school. And it just became this really thing that was just, man, like it got huge in my brain, probably way bigger than it needed to be. We had the option of homeschooling or to school from home, or we could put her in the school, or we also could homeschool if we wanted. And I really didn't want to put her in the school for the sake of, it just didn't seem, it wasn't that if I didn't have the daycare and school, I probably wouldn't have been worried so much about it, but it just didn't seem safe at the time. My husband was also in EMT school at the time, and if he even had a cough, they would send him home and he had to restart the course. Between 2020 and 2021, he took that class 4 different times, because every time he got sick, they would send him home and he would have to take the class again, and paying for this class out of our pocket. And every time he got sick and he missed a day or two, the class was such a fast progressing class, the teacher would be like, oh, you missed too much school, those are the rules, you'll have to take it again next semester. So it just became a really big issue. And I was terrified of anybody even remotely getting the sniffles because of the strict rules through his EMT class. And we chose to keep her home because of that. And I was like, well, this minimizes our exposure, less likely to get sick, everything will be fine. And I was pregnant with my youngest then, and we started having a ton of scares, and we were supposed to be telling the school every time we had any type of exposure to anybody testing positive, and then he would be sent home for 2 weeks and have to start the class over. And it just became a huge issue, and I ended up closing the daycare as well. Only that is, every time we had an exposure, I couldn't go to my prenatal appointments because we couldn't go for 2 weeks. And if you've been pregnant or know somebody who's pregnant, you know that those prenatal appointments become like twice a week or once a week, and then you're missing 2, 3, 4, 5 appointments because you've been exposed and actually ended up with nothing. Like, the whole thing was a mess, and it was exhausting and stressful. So during all that time, we were feeling out the navigation waters of how to homeschool our child, because we decided that we didn't want to school from home for kindergarten. We thought that that would be too difficult for her to learn on a laptop with the daycare. And even without the daycare, I thought it would just be too difficult for her as a 5-6-year-old who barely understood how the computer worked to do all of her assignments online. And with the way things had done with pre-K, I didn't really like that either. So in my searching for curriculum and how to handle kindergarten, I learned that Wisconsin does not require you to register your homeschool until they are in 1st grade. I also learned that the school district my daughter goes to does require kindergarten for enrollment into 1st grade, or you have to ask for an exception. I also learned that all I had to do to withdraw her was understand that if I wanted to put her back in for 1st grade, I would need to ask the school for an exception to allow her in with having not completed kindergarten. I also knew that with everything going on in the world, the likelihood of them not approving that would be pretty slim because of how many parents were choosing to homeschool their kindergartner at that point anyways. So we went ahead and decided to send the letter to the school, since she was technically enrolled in the school, but I didn't need to fill out the forms for Wisconsin homeschooling. I did notify the school that we would not be sending our child back for kindergarten. And since I had done so much for 4K anyways, adding to her curriculum, I didn't think it would be too much of a stretch to just actually buy a curriculum from Timberdoodle. And while I was at it, I ended up buying 2 curriculums from Timberdoodle for the daycare as well, because I really loved Timberdoodle's approach to homeschool, to schooling in general, how they really incorporate all the STEM items and the critical thinking items. And that just really resonated with me as my daycare, and it also resonated with me as a parent and previous teacher myself. We ordered Timberdoodle. We did our entire kindergarten that way. And our kindergarten school year, it went well, but I also decided it was so much with everything going on in the world, with how strict things were, for my husband's EMT class. The rest of the world seemed to be moving on while we were still stuck in this bubble because of that EMT class. We stuck not being able to even cough without him being sent home and we having to spend another $500-600 on another class. It was exhausting mentally for me. And I felt like we got behind in kindergarten because of that. We were having a really hard time reading. We were ahead. She started ahead in math, and then I felt like we didn't keep her ahead, and it was a thing. And I was pregnant as well. It was a whole thing. And then by the time my son was diagnosed with ADHD, then it was a literally really busy, exhausting year. So when 1st grade came around, somewhere about middle of kindergarten, a lot of other things in the world started happening as well. My husband was exhausted from constantly feeling like anytime he even sneezed, he was going to get sent home and have to start over a class. And he has horrific allergies as well. Like in the fall when they're cutting down the hay and the corn and stuff, like he looks like he's dying every year around then because of how sick he is from his allergies. So that was exhausting as well. I mean, he got sent home from work, he got sent home from school, and 90% of the times he would have a letter saying it was his allergies and he wasn't sick, he was not exposed to anything, and they didn't care. They would send him home anyways. Where he was working was a construction company for a healthcare unit or a healthcare company, and they were sending him home too because the healthcare company didn't like that he was coughing, and it was It was exhausting. So kindergarten was exhausting. And I felt like we didn't learn what we should have. But my husband, on the flip side of all that, with as exhausted as he was, felt like I was doing a great job, which I think he's just delusional because he wasn't here. He felt that with a newborn and a toddler and a small child and with all the stress of everything, he thought things were going really well. We had, like I had mentioned, we had ended up choosing to close the daycare as well because we just wanted him to get through his EMT class. And with like as few hiccups and as few exposures to anybody in the world as possible, just so we could get through that class for once. And then we did first grade. First grade went pretty smooth. We again used a Timberdoodle kit. I had kind of at that point branched out a little bit and started grabbing a few other items from different curriculum companies as well. I was starting to, really get my feet on the ground and figure out how to handle 2 small children as well as homeschooling without everything going whoosh on me. And this year, we have a way better of a rhythm. We've had a few hiccups, like when I broke my arm and completely lost my ability to do anything because apparently one non-dominant broken arm caused me to have a complete spiral of freaking out and not being able to handle anything. This year's going a lot better. I mean, we're more on track. I keep feeling like we're behind because we missed out on almost an entire month when my arm was broke, but the reality is we started school a month earlier than the school district did. Technically homeschool year-round, so the likelihood of us falling behind is pretty slim, especially when it was only 1 month. And outside of that 1 month, we've only missed a few days here and there around holidays, which everybody else was missing as well. And the reality is in homeschool, you're not really behind anybody, and that is something I'm really learning this year. It does not matter where my child is education-wise. It doesn't matter. It matters for her. It matters for my son. It does not matter that other 3-year-olds are reading. Most of them aren't, and it doesn't matter if another 3-year-old knows all their ABCs and knows their ABC song and my son does not. My son knows his colors. He knows his numbers. He can add a basic, like if you give him 2 things, he can be like 1 and 1 is 2. And he knows other things like turkeys. He knows, like from our unit studies, he knows all about dinosaurs. They know about vertebrates and invertebrates. And my daughter is where she needs to be educationally. So she is split between, some of her curriculum's first grade, some of her curriculum's second grade, some of her curriculum's third grade. And talking to other homeschooling moms, there's another homeschooling mom, her kids are all grown now, and she is a grandmother, and she is in my farmer's market. And I actually didn't learn that she homeschooled until she was talking to my daughter about what grade she was in. And my daughter looked up at my mom and said, "Grandma, what grade am I in?" And Grandma's going, "2nd grade." And I kind of missed the conversation that happened after that when the lady was asking her what school she went to and her teacher. And I kind of turned around and I said, "Well, what did she say?" And she said, "Well, she said that she's homeschooled because of the virus, And I was like, well, that's how it started, but it's been a few years now, and we homeschool because it's just what works now. But since that was what you had been telling her in kindergarten, that is just how she understands that I'm homeschooled because of that virus that happened. And so, because everybody's sick, we don't want to get sick. And now that isn't the case, we still enjoy, we love homeschooling. I don't even know why in my daycare brain and my schooling brain and my years of lesson planning, I never thought, hey, we should homeschool our kids. It never even occurred to me as an option. I am thankful for the whole virus thing to bring that to us, or we would never have done it. I would have never realized that we could figure out a way to live on one income, that we could figure out a way for me to be home with my kids. It ate me alive every day that I would go to work because I was working 12, 13-hour days. I mean, when you add in working 12-hour days, a lunch period, breaks, and drive time, I was gone anywhere from 12 to 15 hours a day. And it's exhausting. I hated it. I liked my job, and I hated it at the same time, which is why I had opened the daycare, because prior to working in the corporate world, I was a daycare teacher at a actual daycare, and I was like, I'll just work from home. And then all the virus stuff happened, and that just became a lot. And it just became a lot and too much for me to handle emotionally. And we had closed the daycare at the time, so my husband could through EMT with the full intention of reopening the daycare. I had no intention of keeping the daycare closed forever. And the longer we're homeschooling, the more I want to put my energy and my effort into my children. And that may be selfish of me, but that is what I want to do. So that's what we're doing. And I guess, I don't know, this is a really long-winded way of saying that you will find your footing at some point. We all start out with this grand plan that never goes as planned, and every year is a little different. And every year we get more comfortable with homeschooling. We get more adapt to, you know, where we should set stuff, where we should keep things, how to handle homeschooling at the kitchen table and still eating at the kitchen table every day, which is only something we figured out this year, by the way. Like, prior to this, we couldn't eat here because I had so much stuff from the school day here. And it's just, you'll get there. You will get there, and you can do this if it's what you want to do. And no matter how difficult it is or how exhausting it may seem at the time, if it's what you want to do, it will get there. It gets easier every year. And I don't know if that's just because it becomes more something you've already done, or if it's because your kids get older each year, but regardless, from my experience, each year has been easier than the previous year. And we are learning so much, and we've added so many extra unit studies on this year on top of our normal curriculum. We're chugging through our normal curriculum, we're chugging through the unit studies I've added on, and I wish if I could go back in time and tell myself I would have never put my kids in daycare to start with. I would have never put my kids in school, and I probably would have just started this from the get-go with all of them. I guess what I'm saying is, if I could tell my earlier self, I would let myself know that it can be done, no matter how hard it seems, and that if you surround yourself with the right people that uplift you and give you the guidance you need, even if those people are online, that will help you with where you want to go, regardless of what that thing is, whether you want to put your kids in school, or whether you want to keep them home, or whether you want a daycare or don't want a daycare, or if you want to learn Chinese or whatever, like whatever it is that you want, you can obtain it, as long as you give yourself the time to learn how to obtain it and how to adjust your life to what you want. And I don't know if that was very helpful or not, but this is an incredibly long video at this point. Don't forget to go check out Shauna's channel at Making Everyday Magic, and the playlist I will have it linked below as well, and you can see and hear about all the other mamas in their early homeschooling days and how that went with them. And if you have any comments or questions or anything like that, please leave them in the comments section below. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. It super helps me out, and I will talk to you guys next time.